Okay, so I've got some updates to my Memcard Pro UI here. Since I shared it on Twitter, I got a lot of positive responses, so thank you for that. I decided to sort of flesh it out all the way to make it more of like a full replacement UI rather than just like the extra features of seeing the icons and save names and activating. It can now do pretty much everything the original UI could. The only thing I haven't done yet is the settings page, which I do plan to do, and I'll replace the link to the original UI with the settings page, and then this can be a full replacement. You can still run both UIs if you want by just visiting different URLs in your address bar, but this one will be able to do everything that the original UI can do and more. So you can see here there's a few new things added. In addition to the original, seeing the icons and save names and the filtering, you can now also add a new card, delete a card, download a card to your computer, refresh a card. This will reload the data in the card. So if you like delete a save in on your PS1's UI, or you update a save or whatever, and you just want to refetch this single card, you can just hit this and it'll fetch just the data for this card. You can also, of course, refresh everything with just your refresh button in your browser, but this will let you do one card at a time. And you can, of course, still activate a card to set it as active. And you can also rename a card now. So in addition to that, the other thing I did was try to speed up loading and make it as sort of unobtrusive as possible, given the limitations of the Memcard Pro as it works right now. There's only so much I can do about that. It's a tiny little computer that's just powered by your PS1's memory card slot. It just doesn't have that much power. And so loading all the data to do all of this can take some time. So there's a few things I've done to try to work around that as best I can. For one, the UI is still usable while the icons and save names are loading in. Before, you had to wait for everything to load before you could do anything in the UI. But that's no longer true. As soon as it loads the info about the cards, it'll let you use the UI. It'll just still take time for the icons to load in. So I'll show you that now just by refreshing. And you can see there's these placeholders, but I can still go in and delete, activate, download a card, whatever, even while I'm waiting for it to load in. Now you can see it's all loaded in, but it took a little time, but I was still able to use the UI. So that's one step in sort of making it to where, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time for all your icons and save names to load, but at least you can still go in and find your memory card, activate it, download it, delete it, whatever. The other thing that I've done is added this little settings icon here, and it has some settings to try to skip loading empty cards. The only way I can really do this right now is by detecting the first empty card I find and then not loading any more channels. I should say detecting the first empty channel that I find and not loading any more. And I have these turned on by default, and it will save you loading time. And it should be a good thing to use as long as you use your channels in order. If you don't put any saves on channel 1s, 2, and 3, but you put all your saves on channel 4, then this is not a good setting for you because it'll see the first one's empty and it won't load the rest. But if you use your channels in order, which I think most people would, this is a good setting to save you a lot of loading time. So you can actually see that this has been applied because memory card 1, it loaded channel 1 and it has saves on it. So it loaded channel 2, has saves on it. So it loaded 3, has saves on it. So it loaded 4. So it loaded 5, it has saves on it. So it loaded 6, but 6 is empty. So it actually doesn't load channels 7 or 8 because it just says, well, if 6 is empty, probably 7 and 8 are too. So I'm going to skip them. 6 though is still here. That way, if this one does fill up, it's still here so you can set it as active so you can use your next card. If you don't like this or you do use your channels non-sequentially, you can go in here and just uncheck these. It will save them in your browser so that next time you use it, it'll remember your settings. But I have them on by default because it'll be a better experience for most people, I believe. You can, of course, I can do this, uncheck hide non-loaded channels. And now you can see here's 7 and 8. These are the ones that it skipped over. Since it found this one to be empty, it skipped over these, and you see it says not loaded. I can also now, if you notice here that instead of refresh, this says load. So I can actually one-off just be like, oh, you know what? I think I might have had like channel 8 only had a cheat code, like a hacked save on it or something. Let me see. And then I can just, boom, load just this card. And now I can see, no, it's empty for me. But you can load one-off cards if you skip over them. I guess the other thing while we're here, I did do this little extra bonus feature where I detect free PSX boot. I use that to load Japanese games on my US console. And of course, by default, it would actually just be all like errored out because it's not a regular save. But I wrote some extra code to detect it. And so you can see channel 1 of my Japanese games card is a free PSX boot. So I use that to boot into the Japanese games. Then I use the other channels for the saves. So that's the other, and again, you can uncheck this and then refresh and it will load everything, but it's going to take longer. If you watch how long this takes now, it's going to take a lot longer because I'm going to be loading data for all 8 cards. Even if they're empty, it has to load it all. So it's going to take quite a bit longer to get through all of them. The other thing in the settings page that I can show you is that there's an additional setting to hide empty cards. So if you just actually want to see cards with saves on them, you can use that. And you can see now there's not a single empty one visible. So you can also set that if you just want to see cards with saves and don't want to see any empties. So that pretty much covers the new features that I've written so far. I do have a couple of the things I want to show, one of which is one of my beta testers on Twitter sent me their card image. They do have an optical disc emulator, so they have a ton of saves. So I kind of want to show off how that works now. And then one other thing at the end that I want to show off. So I'm going to switch my card data out and then go over that. Okay, so I've swapped my memory card data out with data I got from a user on Twitter who's helping beta test the card. And you can see now, instead of loading just a few memory cards, I'm loading 125 memory cards. Keep in mind, in the Memcard Pro, a memory card is really 8 memory cards. There's 8 channels per card, so this is really 1,000 pieces of memory card data I would have to load. Of course, I have the stop loading remaining channels turned on, so I don't have to load that many. So it's going relatively quickly, but you can see even while I'm here talking, we're only just past the halfway point. Not much I can do about this. Again, there's just some limitations with the way the Memcard Pro is right now. It's a tiny little computer that there's only so much we can do, especially without changing some of the back-end code. But it's loading relatively quickly. But the other thing you can see is I can actually use the UI even while it's still loading. You know, it hasn't finished loading everything yet. I could come down here to the bottom. Castlevania Chronicles. It's not loaded in yet, but if I type in Castlevania, you can see it is loading the course. Now, by now it's loaded in, but I can demonstrate this again and just do this while it's loading. Castlevania. So my filter's still working. Even though I haven't gotten all of the icons and data for this yet, I was still able to filter this down based on the name of the memory card. I can also tell it to load this card out of order by pressing the load button. You can notice these don't say refresh anymore, they just say load. Because if it hasn't loaded yet, you're not really refreshing it, you're loading it for the first time. So you can actually also tell it to just load these out of order because maybe you only care about this. You're going to play a Castlevania game, you filter it down to only Castlevania games, you load the 2 cards you care about, and you set one active. So you can do all of this even if it hasn't finished loading yet. And again, this is sort of the best I can do given the limitations of the Memcard Pro. And you can see we're almost done now, but I can still fully use the UI. And this is something I wanted to make sure worked. So because the way this worked before, if you had an optical disc emulator, you wouldn't be able to do anything yet. You would still be stuck waiting for the whole thing to load. And only now, after these all finished loading, would the UI work. So I sort of changed the way that works so that you can still do as much as possible. You can still do as much as the old UI. In fact, you can do more because you can filter and see all of your cards even while things are loading. And now everything's finished loading in, and you can see I can go through and look at them. And if I only want to see my saves, I can of course go in here and hide the empty channels. And now it's a lot more focused on only cards with saves on them. You can also see that I had this stop loading remaining channels. This helps a ton with an optical disc emulator because I think if you're getting 8 memory cards created for every single game you play, you're probably really only using the first one because you're getting a fresh set for every single game. And you can see that's true for this person. They have a save here for, Namco Tennis Smash Court. Um, they have their save here, but this one's empty. And so it doesn't load channels 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It stops there. And you can see this is a pretty consistent pattern all the way through, not really using any other channels in the first one. And so I'm saving a lot of time by not trying to load all 8. If I try to load all 8 by unchecking these, the load time would be a lot worse, 4 times worse, really. So um, that's the improvement to loading. And it also just shows that now this UI is super usable, even for people with optical disc emulators who have tons and tons of saves. You can still use the UI, even though it takes a while to load all the details, you can still use it. And I think with that, especially with the ability to load them out of order, should make it like super fast and easy to use, even if it takes some time. So that's it. This is now pretty good for optical disc emulators. Even if you don't use that, this is an improvement. It should make things a little faster and easier. I've also done some other things that are a little harder to demo, like error handling, including if you don't have your cache EB installed, it'll come up and tell you you don't have it installed, and it'll give you the download link just like the original UI does. So it has also error handling that's on par, if not better, than the original UI. So it's pretty much there. If I make the settings page, I really think that's the only thing left to make it on par with the original. There is one other thing I want to talk about, so I'm going to queue that up and I'll be right back. Okay, the final thing I wanted to mention was the Memory Card Pro 2 that supports the PS2. I actually don't have one yet. They just came out and I think they're back ordered. I do plan on getting one, and I do want to make a similar UI for the PS2. So I started actually looking into the PS2 memory card format. It's a lot more complicated than the PS1 memory card format, which you might be able to guess. But the PS1, it has 15 blocks. Each block is always in the same place. It's relatively straightforward to parse the data out. It definitely takes some time to figure it all out, but everything's in a fixed position. And other than knowing like if something takes up multiple blocks or if a icon has more than one frame, everything's pretty consistent. With the PS2, it's a full file system. And in fact, it's like a slightly more complicated version of the file system used by old versions of Windows and DOS, where there's a file allocation table that you have to then look up to find where your files could live, and then parse out, different pages. Each page has clusters. But it's even more complicated because the file allocation table could live on multiple clusters because a cluster could go bad, or you could have bigger memory cards than 8 megabytes. So there's actually another index to even find your file allocation table so that you can then look it up to find a directory entry so that you can then use that to go parse out all the data. Even once you do that, you have to then search the folder for a file ending in like an ICO, which then has 3D data in it that you have to parse out, including animation frames, vertex colors, textures, everything, and then render all that to the screen. So there's a lot to do. And I don't have a Memory Card Pro 2, but I do have a PS2 emulator. So I went ahead and did all of that work using the PS2 emulator. And you can see here's that file and folder system. And if I click on one of these, I'm rendering the icons. This includes also animations. And so this is all here. I do think this needs tested more because obviously there's a lot more to it. And I think especially the animations, I probably will have to tweak some things. This is the only animated save icon game that I have. So if anyone has saves of other animated icons they could send me to help keep debugging this, that would be great. But you can see that it does work. I can render the icons out in 3D. I have the game save name here. And now to be clear, this is not the UI I would actually build for the Memcard Pro 2. this is like a bare minimum UI in order to do all the stuff that I just mentioned about how you have to parse all this stuff out. So it's just showing the folders and then a place to render the icons too. Once I actually get my hands on a Memcard Pro 2, I will, use these tools to then make like an intuitive, easy to use UI. But I wanted to show you that like the really hard parts are mostly done. So if I can get my hands on a Memcard Pro 2, I will start working on that next. But yeah, just stay tuned for more updates. Hopefully we'll get some final versions of this stuff out there in the pretty near future. And yeah, thanks everybody for the support, and talk to you soon.